Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Michael Cook. This is the third webinar exploring the functionality of Powerproject. Previous webinars are on the Solid Support website, where you will also find information on Powerproject online training classes. Remember that Solid Support can help with your Powerproject setup, templates and code libraries. We're once again lucky to have Chris Ray with us from Allocating to conduct today's session. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. So we've just got a couple more people joining. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be following up from our previous webinars. We're now going to be looking at allocating resources and costs to a program and ways of doing that and what you can use it for and why you would do it and if you should do it. Really, we're looking at those sections. So just got a couple of people joining and we will start in a few seconds. Again, this session will be recorded, so you will be able to watch this, or any of those who weren't able to attend will also be able to attend. Now, if you are in listen only mode, so you're all muted, there is a questions box on the GoToMeeting panel, which you can ask questions. They'll be seen by ourselves and we'll try and aim to answer them there and then, or if we can't answer them there, we will follow up on those. So hopefully you can all see my screen now with the presentation on for maximising project part 3, and we'll now start. And first part we're looking at is this webinar. We're going to look at the 3 main areas, before we start demonstrating, is what are resources and costs on a program? Do you need to allocate resources and costs on a program? That's an important one, because you don't resource and cost a program just because you think you should. There needs to be a reason behind it as well, because you obviously add a level of complexity into it and what you're doing, and also ongoing maintenance. So you need to understand that you're doing it the right way and don't go over complex. And then progressing resources and costs. And that's what we'd look at through the demonstration about, once you've allocated them, what do you do with them then? And again, that does depend on what you're doing. So first of all, what are resources on a program? What's cost on a program? So in very general terms, resources is when you either allocate a permanent or a consumable resource. Now, a permanent resource would be a person, could be a piece of plant machinery, it could be a room, it could be a piece of hardware. But the whole point of a permanent resource is a resource you can use today, and it's then available to use tomorrow. Now, obviously, you can, inside the software, you can set it as have a limited time of its availability. But in general terms, permanent resource is something you can use today and use again tomorrow. A consumable resource is materials. So this is where you supply a certain amount of resources to a project or on site at a certain point. You can consume those through the activities, and then you can resupply those. And we're going to be looking at mainly permanent, but we'll touch on the consumable as we go through today. And obviously, if there are any follow-up questions, do let Solid Support know. What are costs on a program? Well, in general terms, they're fixed costs on a project or costs you're allocating to the program itself. Now, that can be done on a fixed basis, which means you directly allocate costing values to a particular activity, broken down by different cost centers, which we'll look at as we go through. Or it could be resource-based, and that could be either permanent or consumable. So if it's permanent, it could be an hourly rate. If it's consumable, it could actually be a material cost, including a supply cost, having them delivered on site. Now, when we talk about permanent, one other thing that you can do is it's not just permanent as people and hours, it could be quantities of work that you're doing. But again, those can all have costs assigned to them. So that's what you're doing here. So if you need to cost load a program, you can do that, and you can do it very quickly and easily inside Powerproject. If you're looking to base it on the resources, you can do that as well. Very easy to set up the rates, and you can do a mixture of both. So have fixed costs and so forth. Those fixed costs could also be, if you wanted to, as you go through, could be set up to work on a basis of a quantity of units or time. So it could be for craneage and so forth. It's so much per day, per week that you're paying. That could be spanning the period of all the activities you need the crane on site, and it would work out the overall cost of the craneage for that. And if you have a delay, you would see the impact on that. Now, again, all of this following up from what we looked at before with baselines and so forth. Once you've cost and resource loaded a program, you can baseline it and it will remember everything about your baseline, including those costs and resources. So when they change, and undoubtedly they will, and as time goes on in the program, you can actually do comparisons between those. We'll touch on that as well today as we go through. So looking at the next part is, do you need to? Do you need to allocate resources and cost to your project? And the reason I raise this is we have come across where people have cost loaded or resource loaded a program, and actually all they're looking to do is have a visual representation. So maybe use a code library. And again, we'll touch on that as well. And the other one is keep it manageable. Is keep it as manageable as possible. When you're setting up a program, the more complex you set it up as, and the more details you put onto, if you need to track those, yes, that's good. But if it's I've done it because I can do it, then you could end up in a position where you have too much information to update on a regular basis. So look at how you're going to be updating that. And again, that depends on the type of program, what you're looking to get out of it. And remember, baselining every week will give you that and keep that information as you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump on to actually see this in action. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, is just bring up Powerproject here. And this is just a very simple blank chart here, and just to point out what resourcing is and what resources are and consumables are. So as you can see over here, we have over here in this template, we have permanent resources. We've got crane, we've got design resources, service resources, engineers, and we've got site resources. Now, if I looked at the service engineers in here, you can see we have the different trades inside that. If I look in site resources, we've got the trades in there. And then design resources, we've actually got our structural engineers inside here, and resources could go down to individual people. Ignore the little bracketed information, that's just for the template purposes. We're not going to deal with that, but you can go down to individual people inside Powerproject if you want. And it's literally as simple as just right-clicking and creating a new resource. And when you create that new resource, in there, you have an option to give them the name, details about what calendar they work, and some basic information about who they are. You can copy an existing one that has this set up. You can set cost rates up against these. You can set the assignment levels up and so forth in there. So you can set all of this up as you go. There is an email address in there. Powerproject does have a feature that if you go to an individual person, it can actually send emails out to people if they've been allocated to activities. So it will just send an email out to them if they're not part of your own network, and that will just tell them if it's changed, moved, or assigned to an activity. And as long as you've got Microsoft Exchange or Outlook you're using for your email side. So that's your permanent resources side. Your consumable resources, again, very similar, but it's just consumable materials. So you can set those up in there. And notice with all of these, you can set them up in a hierarchy level to fit your organization, to fit your requirements in there. And then when we look at cost centers, just to point out where the cost centers are over here, again, you can set up the cost center structure that fits your needs. So for example, here we've got project costs, and we break that down, and we broke it down to design fees, labor, materials, and so forth, all the way through. And those can be individually assigned to activities, but roll up to total of project costs. So we can monitor, we can view at high level, but allocate and update and progress at detail level if we wanted to. Now, the reason I take you into this blank project as well, just to give you a quick idea of something, and this is about the question I said about why do you want to resource your project. Now, some people resource a project because all they want to do is they just want to view who's responsible for those activities. And I know we covered this in a previous one, but just to point people out in this, I'm not trying to discourage you from using any of this, but code libraries is not a resourcing tool, but it's a tagging tool. It allows you to tag items. And the reason I point this out is that I can literally say that these people are responsible for these different activities, and these different subcontractors, for example, and I can assign those in here just by dragging and dropping to those. And the reason I do this is because if all I want to do is visually see which activities these people are doing. Once I've done that, in the previous ones we showed you, you can go to this and say open code breakdown structure. You can look at it like that. So if that's what you're classing in resourcing, you can do that without you having to go into the complexities of resources. You can just use code libraries. I'm not saying you're not, today's webinar is talking about resourcing, but I just wanted to cover that because this is a classic thing we find people doing, is using resources over here for actually what they just want to do is visually represent who's working on items. So I'll just close that down and let's open up a predefined project that I've already got in here. And this project here has already been set up. We've got a basic structure in here, the same project we worked on in the last few webinars. In here, we're looking at the on-site works. And what we're looking at here is we've got some resources. And if I open up my resources, I've got my site resources in here, and these are set up. And if I want to allocate these to a project, or an activity inside the project, all I do is I go over to the relevant resource and I can drag that across and drop that person on there. And that allocates that one bricklayer to that item there. Now I could go into the properties and I can actually set up where the allocation, is it just 1 or 2? And I can change that if I wanted to. And if I wanted to assign someone to multiple tasks, I could click on 1, 2, 3, grab hold of someone there and just drop, and it assigns them to all 3. So I could literally go through dragging and dropping and quickly resourcing up my schedule as I require. Now, every resource you allocate in here, if I show you in here, I add a column in for my resources and effort, has a total amount of effort they're achieving. So if that task was 120 days long or 120 hours long, one resource working full time with 120 hours. If I go into the properties of there and I say that, go here and say it's actually 2 in there, then you can see it's 240 hours over 140 hour duration of tasks. 2 people are working on there. So you have the option of doing that. You can also add in a column in here that allows you to say that, allocations, allocation. There's that 2, so I can actually have this pre-set up and change this as I wanted to, and you can see it changes in there. So really very quickly, with a project set up and having a template set up, which you can have, speak to Solid Support about getting a template set up. You possibly already use one in a sense by using the previous project to start a new project. In here, you can just drag and drop across. You drag across and so on there, and that's really easy to do, but it can be easier. And the reason I say this is if I remove these resources that I've just assigned in here, and then what I'm going to do is I can pre-set up a view with a column for each resource. So we've got one inside here that's going to resource and resource entry that has already got those set up. We've now got columns for the bricklayers, carpenters, roofers, and steel fitters. Now I'm not actually worrying about the activities that I'm assigning to here, but as I look at these activities, and if I scroll back and see those, I can now inside here just click in here and say, well, I want 2 of those resources on there, 3 of there, 1 of there, 2 of there, 1 there, 2 there, 3 there. And I'm just literally going through resourcing up my plan just by typing in how many people I need. And that's now giving me a histogram for site resources, how many is needed. It's giving me a stacked histogram over here showing the number of people and the breakdown by the different types of resources I've got. And down here, I've got a heat map of each resource, the bricklayers, the carpenters, the roofers, and steel fitters. And it's showing me their allocation of where they are. So blue is under allocated, red allocated, and then if you go to red, you're over allocated. Now the real advantage of this heat map inside here is that when I'm looking at this, if I can't do it with achieve 160 hours for the bricklayer on that task, I can go and start to profile how many hours I can do and just type in, and it will now, as I go through, it's now going to profile that resource. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I can go through that shown in weeks, but I can have that in months, days, whichever unit I want to show. and I can add the columns that are relevant, but it shows me the amount of effort that in total they're achieving across that time. But it means it's a really useful way to see where there are problems for each resource, because you can set how many resources you have available to you, and you can then monitor those over time. And as I've done that, I come back here, and as you see, it's done exactly what I would have done by just dragging and dropping, and it's allocating the resources straight across onto it. And when I look at those resources allocated, for example, here, if I go into properties, and again, this is more, some people who are already used to using resources, you can actually go in and actually say, rather than a linear, so they're just the same amount of time every day, you can actually assign a profile, which you can define each day, or you can assign a curve of how they're going to be allocated across there. And that's a linear curve, but I could go for a bell-shaped curve of how they're allocated across that period of time. And if I'm not quite happy with it, I can modify it. That's more advanced, but it's just being aware that if someone asks you, can you? Yes, you can. And if you bring in programs from other systems, you can get it to automatically import those curves as well. And so that's inside there. And at the moment, I'm looking at my resources. I can hide them from normal view, but I can see the total amount of effort that's being achieved by those. So I simply just put those in, and I can now see that. When it comes to for costing on a program, just to looking at that side of it, the software allows you to go in here, and again, as I say, set up your own cost center. We've got these set up here. And what you can do is you can literally choose, I want to allocate some design fees to an activity, drag it across and drop it onto a particular activity. If I want to see the values, there it is. And I can actually type in the value there and say that's $5,000 assigned to that, if I wanted to. And again, very useful way of allocating, because you can literally select a number of activities and go in and drag and drop onto those, just like you could do with resourcing. So what you can do with resourcing, you can do the same with costing as well. But again, just like I showed you on the costings, on the resourcing side, what you can do is you can set up a view, and we've got one set up here. And these come with the system as standard in the default template, but you can customize it to your own needs. If I go to cost info, there's my 5,000 assigned. I'm just going to remove that for a moment. Here's my costings assigned to it, spread that across. And now what I can do is I can just type in my values in here as I want to, as I go for. But what I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit interesting, is someone's already provided me with potentially costings already set up. So what I can do is I can just copy those columns in there, and then I can say highlight these and paste that in, and that will give me my costings for my project. And when I roll it up here, I can look at my project costs or my project costs by month, and I can even drill down and see those. And if I squash this up a bit more, there's my cost to date of my program. So we've got a lot of backloaded costs on this one, and we can see by each of the different skills, we've got those costs assigned straight away. Now, obviously the advantage here is that took a few seconds really. Yes, you would have to type the values in and get those values. And if I go back to my project, if I add a cost column in here, so if I add a cost column in, there are my costs for each of my stages. Some of those might be fixed, some of them may be assigned at the very high level, some may project as it is. And if I then put some delays into my project in here, I think that should make there, and I just reschedule that. That should hopefully have moved my activities around a bit. And then if I go to, let's just put a few changes in there. And that. And then once I've done that, if I go back to cost, it will reflect those moves and changes. But also inside here, I can quite easily go in here and say, for example, that I want to view a histogram of my project costs, and I can do the same thing for my resources. I'm just doing cost inside here for project costs, and I want to use and view the differences between the baseline and the forecast side. So I can see those differences in where the costs are going up or spread out from that side. And again, that's all just instantly there because you baselined your project. If I go back to on-site works, there we go. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just look at progressing, because when you come to progress a task, if I go to a task here and enter progress, and again we can set up the columns, but I'm just going to go into enter progress. You have an option to enter progress, right down to your actual start and actual finish dates on there. It does have some cost information there, but you also have the allocations. So here I can look at the allocations for the design fees. And so I can say a percentage of that cost. Now that can be automatically taken from the task, but I can actually put some actual cost in there. So that might be driven from somewhere else. So if we look at this by adding a column in, and I'm going to say, let's put in an actual cost column in there. And if I turn my costs on so you can just see those for a moment in here, here's the cost. So if I said this task for here, for example, was 50% complete, it would assume by default that 50% of the cost has been spent. But actually, I can start to go into here and say, well, actually only 1,000 of that was, whoops, 10,000 that was, let's say 1,000 was spent. Oops, I need to change that to just the progress period. So I spent 1,000 that month on there, 1,000 on there. So I can start to play with the actuals, and if I had it showing, I can look at my costs remaining in there as well. So I can have this set up in here, and I can start to play with these and say, well, actually, there's still another 5,000 remaining. So it's a total of 6. So it allows you to feed that information, and if you have that information elsewhere and you have it in the same format as we had before of copy and pasting, you could copy and paste the actuals in. So you could put the spend, start and finish dates in there as well. So it would allow you to put all of this in as you go through, just for your resources, just for your costs. When we come to resourcing, and as we saw before, if I just pull this down to show you, again in here, if I just go and show my resources in here, as you saw before, I can actually add a column in for resource effort, which shows me the effort total, but by each of these, which I could change. But I can also add in a column that allows me to show resource actual effort. And again, set that this time to resource and set it to the progress period entry. And so I can actually say how much this week or this month or my reporting period, about 31 hours have I done, and I can say I've done 5 hours of it in there. And I can also see a column that now shows me effort remaining in there. So we can see there's my 31 hours, but I could also say that actually we're still now needs to do 30 hours in total. So actually we need to do more because we haven't achieved enough as we've got in there. And again, you don't have to do this. Resourcing, this is different grades of how you resource. So you may simply just want to assign your resources, as we saw here, by a number of people and just allocate it and let it progress from the task. all the way through to actually capturing that information week by week of how much time people have done and how much they've done. This allows you to start using earned value reporting against what you've done and what you're expected to do. Powerproject in from a costing side has inside of it has earned value, so you can look at all of this information here if you're entering your actuals and so forth, so you can start working with those. But again, with all of this added into a system here, when I look at my normal project, I can look at it just as a normal project. This information is just being allocated as I go through and as I need to look at it. So I allocate my costs, allocate my progress normal, and maybe that progress entering normal is my actual start and actual finish of the completed section. And that will work out a cost. But if I'd want to update that cost, I have the facilities to do that. So I can get really in depth and track week by week, actual costs, actual spend in there. And one of the cost centers we've got in here is revenue. So some clients include billing milestones, so when they're expecting revenue in, so they can monitor cash flow on their project. But after all of that said and done, they've done that, they may not have any of that on the main columns, and they're just analyzing their project as they would normally plan it as a planner side here, and you just see it being progressed. But behind the scenes, you've got your resourcing information, you've got your costing information that's all being driven and working on updating your costs. Can everyone hear me? Someone just said it's gone off.
Chris, Michael here, I can hear you. It was off for a little while, for about maybe 20 seconds, but we're back.
Oh, okay, possibly my internet. Apologise about that. Yeah, so in here, updating your costs, updating resources, and allocating your costs and allocating resources. Very straightforward. Key to it, if you can make it really easy just by templating this all inside Powerproject. Powerproject starts off with some basic templates that you can use for this information, and then you can move beyond that and start setting your own ones up inside there. And again, all of this, as you see, this is just the standard template pretty much with a small project that I've put in here. And I just copied and pasted those details out and then pasted them back in through Excel, which allows me to do that. Now, again, if you enter progress against the tasks, you can do that. Now, Powerproject does allow you to go into advanced options with resourcing, where you can actually specify the calculation, how it calculates, and the resource drives the task if you want it to. You can specify inside Powerproject that you're based on quantity of work that's being done, and then you can progress it by the quantity of work that's being done. So you can keep on making those steps and those further and further detailed steps as you need to. So if you want to run a multi-billion dollar project that's fully resourced, fully allocated, progressed up to week by actual hours, actual quantities, you can do that. But you can also, if you just want a very simple resourcing to say how many people, you can do that as well. It depends on what your need is to do. Are those resources being controlled by you and monitored by you, or is it something that the subcontractor is doing for you? If so, then you may just have certain information they need to feed back to you. And that's pretty much the resourcing side. Now, obviously, I say we can go into a lot more there's a lot more detail you can go into, but that's the basics of it with Powerproject. It is as simple as just dragging and dropping. If you wanted to, you can take it a step further. If I go into the properties of here, these are the cost rates that I can assign, and I can literally say, I want to assign a rate or create a new rate for bricklayer in here. And that's going to be bricklayer, let's say $150, you know, and I can say that's going to be $150. I can choose what cost center that's coming from. So that could be the labor cost center, it's a cost rate. And I can even choose whether it's all working exceptions or just overtime rate or whichever. And that can just be assigned to that resource. Now, the advantage is that that is general, but I can actually, for every task, they can have a different rate. So I can play around with that. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, well, let me just switch back to this. If anyone has any questions, please let me know now. You can type anything in.
Chris, that was excellent. For everybody attending, we will be loading this onto our website afterwards if you want to have a look at it again. If you do want to see some more detail around any of the functionality, just reach out to us at Solid Support and we can arrange to do that one-on-one with you at any time.
Excellent. Well, everybody, thank you very much. Do let us know if you have any questions and we can go from there. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.